Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, because what you're about to hear is a true story that starts in the most unlikely place, a luxury cruise in the Caribbean, and a faint, desperate bark coming from a deserted island. When Jack Carter, a Boston businessman, broke away from the crowd that day, he thought he was just escaping work stress. He had no idea he was walking straight into a moment that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about loyalty, survival, and the soul of a dog. What happened next? No one, not even Jack, could have predicted. Stay with us. Jack Carter didn't want to be on the ship. He told himself he did, told his doctor, his colleagues, even his mother. "I just need a break," he had said, rehearsed, convinced. But 3 days into the luxury Caribbean cruise aboard the Ocean Majesty, he was still tethered to the life he was supposedly escaping. His phone, despite being out of service range, sat in his pocket like a pacemaker. He kept checking it out of habit, thumbing through non-existent messages, as if work might reappear in a signal-less sky. On the 4th day, the cruise offered a castaway experience on an uninhabited island. Passengers were giddy about beach volleyball, drinks in pineapples, and selfies on driftwood. Jack wasn't interested. He disembarked, but not for the games. The moment his feet hit the sand, he slipped away from the group, following a narrow footpath swallowed by dense vegetation. Something pulled at him, a pressure he couldn't name. His designer loafers were useless against thorns and stones, but he didn't turn back. 20 sweaty, scratched up minutes later, he stumbled into a small clearing overlooking a hidden cove. The sea down below shimmered like glass. For the first time in days, Jack stopped moving. He listened, and then he heard it, a faint, broken bark. Not loud, not frantic, just defeated. He stiffened, scanning the beach beneath the cliff. Something moved unsteady, almost spectral, emerging from a shaded rock outcropping. Jack squinted. A dog. No, that couldn't be right. But there was no mistaking the silhouette. Pointed ears, a long snout, and the unmistakable gait of a German shepherd. Jack's breath caught. The animal was skeletal fur, matted and patchy, ribs pushing through skin like tent poles. It limped a few feet, then collapsed in the sand, as if walking had drained every last reserve of energy. Jack didn't think. He moved. He scrambled down the rocks, his hands gripping roots and sharp edges, shoes slipping, shirt tearing open across the chest. He reached the beach, heart pounding from more than the climb. "Hey," his voice cracked as he approached. How did you?" The dog lifted its head with effort. One ear flopped slightly. Its eyes deep amber, striking even through the haze of exhaustion locked onto his. There was no growl, no sign of fear. Just stillness. Slowly Jack knelt. He extended a hand, open-palmed. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, it shifted barely and pressed its muzzle into Jack's outstretched fingers. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through Jack's chest, like an old piano string snapping under sudden tension. He swallowed hard. "You've been waiting," he whispered, not knowing why he said it. "Haven't you?" The dog Peter, he would later name him, closed his eyes for a beat, as if in quiet confirmation. Jack looked around the empty cove. No tracks, no campfire remains, no boats, just the dog, just this moment. He gently ran his fingers along Peter's back. Beneath the rough, dirty coat was a map of bones and bruises. His ribs counted like rosary beads. His paws were raw. Jack had spent years reading markets, people, trends, but nothing prepared him for reading this body. It spoke of hunger, salt, pain, and something far worse, being forgotten. "I'm getting you out of here," Jack said suddenly. The words rose without permission, and once spoken, they hardened into truth. He leaned forward, slid his arms beneath Peter, and lifted. The dog was terrifyingly light. Jack could feel every ridge of bone against his chest, every shallow breath the animal took. He began the climb back up. Each step was a struggle. His muscles burned, his shirt clung to his skin, his arms trembled, but Peter never took his eyes off him. That stare held something Jack couldn't explain. Trust, maybe, or recognition. As if the dog had been waiting specifically for him. Not just anyone, him. By the time he reached the beach where the crew's activities were still in full swing, Jack looked like he'd been in a bar fight with the jungle, mud on his face, clothes ripped and soaked with sweat. He didn't care. A group of sunburned passengers looked up in confusion, frozen mid-bite, mid-laugh. "Someone get the doctor," Jack called out, striding toward the group, Peter cradled like a wounded child in his arms. People parted. Someone radioed the ship. Miranda Chen, the ship's medical officer, arrived within minutes. Her brows lifted. "Is that from the island?" "He's dying," Jack said. "He needs help. He's been out there alone, God knows how long." The doctor knelt beside Peter, inspecting him quickly. "Dehydrated, emaciated. I can't do much without proper equipment." "Then take us back," Jack said, "to the ship. Or a clinic. Anywhere." The excursion coordinator stepped forward. "Sir, one understand, but we can't allow an unregistered animal on board. There are health protocols, international regulations. I'm not leaving him." Jack's voice was calm, sharp, steel beneath velvet. "If he can't go, I won't either. You can pick me up on your return trip." People gasped. A few clapped. One older woman whispered, "About time someone stood up for something real." Miranda looked up at him. "I'll call the captain." As debate erupted behind them, Jack stood silently, still holding Peter close. The dog's eyes were half closed now, but he hadn't stopped looking at Jack. That tether, that invisible line connecting them, only tightened with each second. Jack had no idea why he felt what he felt. He wasn't a dog person, he wasn't even a rescue story person, but here he was, sacrificing his luxury cruise, his reputation, his comfort, and none of it mattered, because in Peter's silent, exhausted gaze, Jack saw the first thing in years that actually did matter. Transition to part 2, but Jack had no idea this wasn't just a rescue. It wasn't even about saving a dog. It was the beginning of a truth far bigger than either of them, and it was going to change everything. The scene on the beach had turned tense. Jack stood at the center of a loose circle of confused, sun-drenched tourists and flustered crew staff. In his arms, Peter lay limp, eyes dull but still open. The moment was suspended in a kind of stunned silence until someone broke it. "You can't bring a sick animal aboard." A man barked, stepping forward, arms crossed. He wore a golf shirt, thick sunscreen streaked across his nose. "What if it has rabies? What if it bites someone? Where's the coordinator? I'm calling the manager." Jack didn't even flinch. His arms tightened slightly around Peter's frail body, but he didn't speak. Not yet. The crew's coordinator, Carla, a woman in her early 40s with a clipboard and an apologetic smile, approached carefully. "Sir," she said gently, "I completely understand your concern, but we have protocols for these situations. For the safety of all guests, we can't allow unknown, unvetted animals on board." Jack's jaw clenched. "This isn't an animal. This is a soul that's dying." She blinked. "I know this is emotional, but no. You don't know," Jack said quietly but firmly. "You didn't find him. You didn't look in his eyes. He's been alone on that island for months, surviving when he shouldn't have. He didn't give up, and I'm not about to give up on him now." Carla hesitated. "Sir, we can file an incident report. Perhaps we can arrange a pickup with local authorities. But we cannot jeopardize the ship's health codes." "Then I'm not going," Jack said. The words were calm, absolute. They didn't come from impulse, but from something deeper, something settled inside him the moment Peter pressed his muzzle into his palm. "I'll stay," Jack added. "Leave me here if you have to. Come back for me on the return route." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman near the back actually dropped her coconut drink. Even Peter stirred faintly, shifting his head as if trying to process what had just been said. Carla's lips parted, then closed again. She turned to Miranda, who was kneeling beside them, her medical bag open, stethoscope in hand. "Can he even survive?" she asked under her breath. Miranda didn't look up. "Not on this beach. That dog needs the fourth fluids. He's critically dehydrated. If we don't act soon, it won't matter what the rules say." Carla pressed a button on her radio. "Captain, we have a situation." Over the next hour, discussions sparked like wildfires: legalities, health risks, insurance, timing. Jack stood his ground, unmovable, like a rock battered by waves but refusing to crumble. Eventually, a solution surfaced. The cruise ship could not return early, but the nearby island of San Marcos had a small veterinary clinic. A rescue skiff could transport Jack and Peter there while the ship continued its route. Jack agreed without hesitation. By the time the skiff arrived, Jack was soaked in sweat, cradling Peter close as they bumped across waves in a motorboat designed more for cargo than passengers. Miranda insisted on coming with them. No one argued. The clinic in San Marcos was modest, a whitewashed building tucked behind a market square, with fading posters of smiling golden retrievers and cheerful cats on the windows. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and dried lavender. Dr. Mateo Alvarez greeted them at the door. He was older, with wiry grey hair and gentle eyes, and he didn't ask many questions. He just acted. Within minutes, Peter was on the examination table, hooked up to fluids. His paw shaved for the fourth. Jack sat nearby, back straight, hands clutched in his lap. Miranda stayed for an hour, then made arrangements to return to the ship. "He's in good hands," she told Jack before leaving. "So are you." Jack nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. When the room quieted, Dr. Alvarez finally broke the silence. "No microchip," he said, removing the scanner from Peter's body. "No tags. No ID." Jack stared at the floor. He was on an island. Alone. "We found him by chance." The vet looked up. "How long?" "No idea. Months, maybe." Dr. Alvarez looked at Peter with a kind of reverence. "No food source, no fresh water, and yet—" He shook his head. "You should know, Senor Carter, what this animal did to stay alive. It defies explanation." Jack stood and stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Peter's frail form. "He's a fighter," he said. "I've seen that. And I owe him something I haven't owed anyone in years: my full attention." Peter stirred slightly at the sound of Jack's voice. One eye opened. The fourth bag ticked slowly overhead. That night, Jack stayed in a cheap motel across the street, refusing offers of luxury accommodations. He didn't want comfort. He wanted to be close. Every 2 hours, he crossed the road to check on Peter. At dawn, he brought coffee and sat beside him in the recovery room. By the second day, colour returned to Peter's ears. He lifted his head on his own. His breathing steadied. By the third, he attempted to stand, legs shaking like a newborn fawn. Jack watched every movement, chest tight, eyes burning from lack of sleep. "Doctor." Alvarez smiled faintly. "You have a strange effect on him," he said. "He shouldn't be healing this fast." Jack said nothing. He didn't need to. He felt it too, something unspoken between them, old and instinctive, as if this wasn't their first crossing of paths. When Dr. Alvarez asked if Jack had ever owned a dog, Jack laughed softly. "No, I barely had time for people." The vet nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Then maybe it's not about time, maybe it's about timing." That evening, as Peter lay asleep, Jack stood outside the clinic watching the island sky fade into soft twilight. His phone buzzed, work emails piling up. He powered it off. This wasn't just a stray. This wasn't just an accident. This was a choice. Transition to part 3, but the miracle of Peter's survival was only the surface. What lay buried in his past would shake everything Jack thought he knew and lead him toward a truth no one saw coming. Jack didn't sleep deeply after their second night in San Marcos. Even with Peter showing signs of improvement, something in the room felt unsettled. It was nearly 3 in the morning when he heard it. A low, strained sound, half growl, half moan, rising from the corner where Peter lay curled on a thin blanket. Jack sat up instantly. Peter's paws twitched violently, claws scraping at the floor. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. He whimpered, then let out a guttural cry so broken, so human, it made Jack's skin go cold. "Peter," Jack whispered, sliding down beside him. "Hey, buddy. It's okay. You're safe." But the dog didn't respond. His eyes stayed shut, his body tensed as though caught in invisible wires. Jack placed a hand gently on Peter's side. The shivering didn't stop. Then suddenly, Peter jolted awake, eyes wide and searching, mouth open in silent panic. He lunged forward a few inches before collapsing again, heart pounding against Jack's hand. Jack looked into those terrified eyes and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was a memory, something old, something unfinished, something trapped. That morning, he asked the vet about trauma in dogs, whether they could retain emotional memory the way humans did. Doctor. Alvarez nodded solemnly. Absolutely. They remember sounds, scents, moments, especially moments of fear. Jack didn't press, but his mind didn't stop racing. Later that afternoon, he took Peter out for a short walk near the marina. The dog moved gingerly, still regaining strength, but his ears twitched constantly, as if listening for something only he could hear. As they passed a row of fishing boats, an older man sitting on an overturned crate dropped the net he was mending and stared. "Dios mio," the man gasped. Jack stopped. "Sorry, did he startle you?" The man didn't answer. He stood, eyes locked on Peter. "That dog, that's the one from the storm." Jack frowned. "What storm?" The man pointed toward the horizon. 3 months ago, a yacht sank during a squall. Big one. Everyone said the man aboard drowned, but I saw the dog, swimming. "Are you sure?" Jack asked, heart thudding. The man nodded slowly. "See, German Shepherd. Just like him. He tried to swim after the boat went under." Jack knelt beside Peter, who now stared at the man as though trying to understand the words. The man crossed himself. They said no one survived, just pieces of the boat washed up, no dog, no man. Back at the motel, Jack pulled out his phone and searched. It didn't take long. Local news had covered it briefly. A yacht named Solace. Registered to an American named Michael Reynolds. Last known radio transmission, Mayday, 2 passengers, man and dog on board. The storm hit fast. No one found a body. There was a photo included. A man standing proudly beside his yacht, tall, athletic, smiling like someone who had finally found peace. At his feet sat a German shepherd, strong, noble, alert. Jack stared at the image. The dog's face was unmistakable. It was Peter, except back then his coat was thick, his build full, his posture proud. But Jack's attention didn't stay on the dog. It drifted to the man. Something about him tugged at a place Jack didn't know existed. The shape of his jaw, the intensity of his eyes. There was no rational reason for it, but Jack felt it like a punch to the chest. He flipped the screen toward Peter. "You knew him, didn't you?" Peter didn't react until Jack spoke again. "Max," he said, trying the name used in the article. "Was that your name before?" Peter's ears shot up. His body straightened, and for a moment his expression changed, becoming sharper, alert in a way Jack hadn't seen since the island. He repeated it. "Max." The dog's tail moved once, not wagging, just acknowledging. Jack sank into the chair beside him, stunned. Jesus, he stayed up that night reading every article, every forum post, every mention of the wreck. There was little information. Michael Reynolds had been a high-profile investment executive from Chicago who left his firm abruptly to sail solo around the world with his dog. Friends called it a midlife crisis. His sister was quoted saying, "He just wanted peace." He said he'd lost his soul somewhere in the spreadsheets. Jack rubbed his temples. The words cut too close. The next morning, he visited the marina again, asking if anyone knew how to reach Michael's family. A young dockhand offered a name, Elizabeth Reynolds, his sister, currently in Colorado. Jack found her contact through an alumni directory. It took a deep breath and a 10-minute pacing session before he dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. He introduced himself gently, cautiously explaining the events. At first, she said nothing. Then he heard her breath catch. "His dog?" she asked, voice trembling. I think I have him," Jack said. "Or he has me. I don't know anymore." They set up a video call. Jack angled the camera toward Peter, who now rested in the clinic's sunlit courtyard. The moment Elizabeth saw him, she covered her mouth with both hands. "That's Max," he whispered. "Oh my God, Michael loved him more than anyone. He wouldn't have gone on that trip without him." Peter Max lifted his head, ears twitching at her voice. He stood, shaky but determined, and stared into the screen. "Max," she said through tears, "it's me, Lizzie." He stepped closer to the camera, tail swaying slightly, his head tilted the same way it had in the photo. Elizabeth wiped her eyes. "My brother built that yacht just for the two of them. He said if he died at sea, it would be worth it as long as Max had one chance to live free." Jack felt his throat close. "He didn't die alone," he murmured. "Some part of him didn't." That night, the dreams came back. Jack was underwater, darkness above, pressure all around. He saw the shape of a dog swimming toward him, not to rescue him, but to lead him, to pull him toward something forgotten, something buried deep. He woke with Peter at his feet, staring silently. And for the first time, Jack said the words out loud. "Michael, are you still in there?" Peter didn't move, but his gaze was steady, knowing. Jack didn't expect an answer. He didn't need one, because deep in his gut, he already felt the truth. And when a storm rolled in the next evening out of nowhere, sharp and sudden, Peter reacted before the thunder even hit. Jack would soon learn the soul he thought might be gone had never left. And when a new storm crashes ashore, Peter will show Jack that this spirit, whoever it once belonged to, has unfinished business. And it has only just begun. The storm came with no warning. One moment, the sky over San Marcos was clear, calm, deceptively still. The next, a wall of wind slammed into the coast with the fury of a long-held breath finally released. The clinic windows rattled. Palm trees bent low, moaning under the sudden pressure. Jack stood at the doorway of the motel, watching the horizon disappear into grey. Behind him, Peter paced. It wasn't the kind of restless movement dogs make when they need food or a walk. This was something else. His ears pinned back, his breathing accelerated. He stared at the door like it owed him answers. Then he began to bark short, sharp, urgent. Jack turned. "Hey, easy boys, just a storm." But Peter wasn't barking at the wind. He bolted toward the exit, scratched at the frame, turned, and barked at Jack again this time, with something unmistakable in his eyes. Panic. Jack opened the door. Peter shot into the hallway, paws sliding on the tiles. He reached the end, turned left, then right, then skidded down the stairs. Jack followed, pulse rising, shouting his name over the roar of wind. Outside, the storm had found its voice. Thunder cracked like bones in the sky. Rain came sideways. Jack shielded his eyes and saw Peter racing across the courtyard toward the cliffs behind the resort. Jack ran after him, soaked within seconds. At the edge of the bluff, Peter stopped and barked into the wind. Jack reached him, chest heaving, legs shaking. Then he saw it, a small fishing boat, just offshore, out of control. The vessel slammed into waves like a matchbox, spinning, drifting toward the jagged rocks near the marina wall. A figure clung to the boat's bow, a teenage boy, maybe 16, struggling with one oar, the other gone. Jack could barely see his face, but the outline of terror was unmistakable. Jack turned to Peter, but the dog was already moving. Without hesitation, Peter sprinted down the incline toward the water. Jack screamed his name. Peter didn't stop. He hit the surf like a bullet, plunging into the waves with a power that should have been impossible for a dog who'd nearly died just weeks ago. Jack watched, frozen, as the German shepherd cut through the sea like he belonged there, like he'd been training his whole life for this one moment. The boy on the boat slipped once, then caught himself. Peter reached the hull, circled once, then disappeared beneath the surface. Jack's body moved before his mind could catch up. He kicked off his shoes and dove in, the cold hitting him like a slap across the face. Every wave threatened to roll him, to crush him against coral or drag him out to sea. But he kept going, stroke after stroke, following glimpses of Peter's head, his ears barely breaking the surface. When Jack reached the boat, Peter had already found a rope how Jack would never understand, and was dragging it in his jaws toward the shoreline. The boy on board shouted something in Spanish, eyes wild, knuckles white around the rim of the vessel. Jack clung to the side and heaved himself up. Inside, the boy pointed to the rope, to Peter, to the shore. Jack understood. They were going to try to pull the boat in. With numb hands, Jack secured the rope to a metal loop near the front. He looked at Peter, now back in the water, eyes locked on his. Peter turned and began to swim. The rope grew taut. The boat shifted. And slowly, so slowly, it almost didn't seem to be happening. It began to move. Peter swam with everything he had, his body fighting current and exhaustion, muscles trembling but relentless. Jack and the boy used the remaining oar to help steer, dodging rocks, adjusting their angle. Every few seconds, Peter would disappear beneath the foam. Jack's heart would stall, but then he'd surface again, never letting go of the rope, never looking back. By the time they reached the shallows, a crowd had gathered. Hotel staff, locals, guests wrapped in towels and disbelief, rushed forward. Dozens waded into the surf to pull the boat the final distance. Peter reached the sand and collapsed. Jack was beside him in seconds. Peter's sides heaved, his paws bled, his eyes still open held no pain, only clarity, as if he had done exactly what he was meant to do. Jack fell to his knees, rain pouring down his face, mixing with tears he didn't try to hide. He ran his hands along Peter's soaked fur, whispering words that barely formed. "You did it, doctor." Alvarez pushed through the crowd, soaked to the bone. He dropped beside them, checking Peter with trembling hands. This isn't possible," he whispered. No dog in his condition, no animal should have survived that, let alone pulled two people to shore. But Jack didn't hear him. He was too busy holding the dog who had just saved him twice. The boy's parents arrived moments later, falling to their knees, holding their son, sobbing into his shoulders. No one could explain how he had ended up adrift. The boy could barely speak. But when he did, he looked at Jack and pointed at Peter. "El escucho algo," he said. "El perro sabía. El vino por mí." He heard something, Jack translated in his mind. The dog knew. "He came for me." Peter lay on his side, his breathing shallow but steady. He didn't move, but when Jack leaned closer, he felt something pass between them again, an unspoken current of meaning too big for words. Later, back at the clinic, as Dr. Alvarez treated Peter's injuries and murmured in quiet awe, an old man stepped through the door. It was the same fisherman Jack had spoken to days earlier. He removed his cap, eyes solemn, and gestured for Jack to follow him outside. Under the awning, the storm now reduced to drizzle. The old man lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. "There's an old belief," he said in Spanish. Jack followed, understanding every word through tone if not vocabulary. "When someone dies at sea," the man continued, "their soul sometimes finds a way back. Through a dolphin, a bird, or," he looked directly at Jack, "through a beloved animal." Jack swallowed. "You think, Peter?" The man nodded. "The storm 3 months ago was not natural. It came from nowhere. Like this one, sudden, hungry, it took the sailor. But the dog? Maybe it did not just survive. Maybe it was sent." Jack said nothing. He couldn't. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in what he had seen. Peter, a dog who should have been dead weeks ago, had pulled a boat to shore, had known where to go, had responded to a storm before anyone else felt it. What if Michael Reynolds hadn't vanished entirely? What if something remained? Jack looked out at the sea, the wind pulling gently at his sleeves. And suddenly, the mystery wasn't terrifying anymore. It was sacred. And Peter was no longer just a dog. He was a bridge, a memory, a promise not yet fulfilled. And then, a new question formed in Jack's mind, one he hadn't dared ask before. If Peter had saved that boy, if he had fought through death and distance to do it, what else was he meant to finish? And with that question, a door quietly creaked open. Because the storm had only cleared the surface, what lay beneath was still waiting. The morning after the storm, the sky opened wide and clear, as if the chaos of the night had never happened. The ocean lay calm, shimmering like a sheet of glass, hiding the truth of what it had nearly claimed. Jack sat in the sunlit courtyard of the vet clinic, a mug of coffee untouched in his hand, Peter lying beside him, still recovering but breathing easier. His phone buzzed again. Another email. Another subject line demanding decisions, signatures, answers. Jack looked at the screen for a long moment before setting it face down on the table. Then he turned to Peter. "You knew," he said quietly. "Didn't you?" Peter didn't move, but his eyes blinked once. Slow, present. Later that day, Elizabeth called. Her face on the screen was soft with grief, but lit with a quiet resilience. She had something for Jack, something Michael had left behind. She had found it buried in an old folder, labeled, "If I don't make it back, I think it's meant for you," she said. The envelope arrived 2 days later. It was weathered, the edges curled, the ink on the front slightly smudged from time. No name, just handwriting in black ink, for the one who finds him. Jack waited until the clinic closed for the evening, until the island had quieted before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it back. I don't know who you are, but I know one thing: you found Max. And that means you're the kind of person who stopped, who noticed, who cared." Jack swallowed. "I spent 15 years building a life that looked perfect on the outside and felt empty on the inside. I had money, power, the kind of reputation people chase for decades. But none of it meant anything once I realized I didn't know who I was without a job title. So I left. I took Max and chased silence. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd find something real out there. Or remember what real even felt like." Jack paused, the letter trembling in his hands. He read on. "If Max is still alive, then you've seen it too. The way he looks at you, like he knows more than you do. Like he's waiting for you to figure it out. I used to joke that he was the soul I lost along the way, just walking beside me until I found my way back. Please let him keep going. Let him lead. He's always known better than I did. Live the life I didn't. Don't wait to breathe. Don't wait to mean something. Time isn't promised." The letter was signed simply, "Michael Reynolds." Jack stared at the words long after they stopped making sense on the page. His fingers loosened. The paper slipped into his lap. That night, he made a decision without needing to think. The next morning, Jack called his office. His assistant picked up, her tone already clipped. "You've been gone nearly a month, Jack. The Westridge merger is collapsing. I'm not coming back," he said. There was a long silence. "You're what?" "I'm resigning." He hung up before she could answer. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel the need to explain himself. The next few days passed in a blur of motion and clarity. Jack booked an open-ended stay on the island, then rented a small camper van and had it shipped to San Marcos. He sold half of his stocks, deleted his calendar, closed out the account that had once ruled his every move. Peter recovered slowly but surely. Every morning they walked the shoreline. Peter's steps grew steadier. His ears perked higher. His gaze began to wander, no longer searching but observing. Curious, present, Jack started writing. Nothing ambitious. Just scribbled notes in a journal, fragments of moments he wanted to remember. The smell of rain on salt. The sound of Peter's breathing when the world was finally quiet. One day, in a small village north of the island, Jack met a local schoolteacher who ran a tiny rescue shelter behind her house. They struck up a conversation about loss and rediscovery. She invited him to speak to her students about Peter. Jack agreed, unsure why. The kids asked questions, some simple, some profound. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Why did the dog save that boy?" Jack thought for a long time. "Because sometimes," he said, "we carry pieces of someone else's purpose, and we don't always get to choose when it becomes our turn to finish it." After the talk, he sat outside and watched Peter lie in the grass, surrounded by children who touched him gently, almost reverently, not as a pet, but as something more. A few weeks later, Elizabeth called again. "I've been thinking," she said. "Michael would have wanted Max to stay with someone who truly understood him, and I think that's you." Jack didn't argue. He couldn't. He was no longer just caring for Peter. He was walking alongside something sacred. The weight of that realization didn't scare him. It steadied him. And so they kept moving. From the coasts of San Marcos to quiet towns tucked between cliffs and jungle, they hiked, they camped. Jack began building a blog, documenting their travels not for fame, but for memory. He wanted to leave something behind that mattered. Peter changed too, not physically, but in presence. He seemed to sense things before Jack did, a change in weather, a shift in mood. He would nudge Jack's leg gently whenever Jack started slipping into old habits, checking the phone, tensing his jaw, retreating into that version of himself who had lived for the approval of others. One evening, after a long drive into the mountains, they pulled over to rest on a ridge overlooking the sea. Jack sat on the roof of the van, Peter lying beside him, both silent. The wind moved through the trees like memory. Jack reached down and touched Peter's fur. "You didn't just survive, did you?" he said softly. "You were sent. You were waiting for me." Peter didn't react, but he didn't need to. Jack leaned back and looked up at the stars. He thought of Michael, of spreadsheets and deadlines, and a voice that once belonged to someone who thought success was enough. He thought of that letter, and what it meant to carry a life forward that someone else didn't finish. He didn't have all the answers. But he had one truth he clung to with everything he had. Peter hadn't just helped him breathe again. He had given him a reason to. And now, every step they took, every mile they crossed, every person they met all pointed towards something more, something Jack wasn't sure he was ready for. But Peter was already guiding him toward it, toward a destination neither of them could name yet, but they both knew they were getting closer, because Peter wasn't just helping Jack live. He was leading him to an ending, or perhaps a beginning greater than either of them had ever imagined. They drove with no fixed destination, just the road, the wind, and the quiet hum of the van's engine stretching out beneath them like a song that never needed words. Jack and Peter wandered through canyons kissed by golden sun, through sleepy coastal towns where time moved like driftwood, through forests so deep the sky disappeared entirely. Each stop became a thread in the strange, beautiful tapestry of their second life. People noticed Peter wherever they went, not because he was a large German shepherd with a striking face, but because there was something else, something quieter. It was in the way he watched people with unblinking eyes, as if measuring the weight of their pain. It was in the way strangers sat beside him and began to talk, not even realizing they were doing it. He listened better than most people ever did. Soon Jack was invited to speak, first at a small-town library in Oregon, then at a community center in Utah, a recovery group in Montana, a school in Maine. Every room filled with people who had lost something or someone or were afraid they were about to. He never read from notes. He just spoke plainly. "I used to think success meant being unreachable," he told them. "Then I met a dog who showed me that being reachable was the only way to be fully alive." Peter always sat beside him on those stages, still and steady. Children asked to pet him. Veterans sat with him long after the crowd had gone. One woman knelt beside him after a talk and whispered, "You remind me of my brother." Jack never questioned it anymore. Some things couldn't be explained. They didn't need to be. They used donations from their talks to launch a small foundation. Jack named it the Solace Project, in quiet tribute to the lost boat, the lost man, and the soul who somehow wasn't really lost at all. The goal was simple: fund training for rescue dogs, support shelters in underserved communities, and create spaces for people and animals to heal each other without shame. The first grant helped build a new wing for a no-kill shelter in Kansas. The second trained therapy dogs for children with trauma. Jack didn't just write checks. He showed up, helped build fences, held grieving pet owners, cried with them when it was appropriate, walked with them when words wouldn't do. They slept under stars in Arizona, ate roadside pie in Tennessee, watched snow fall silently in Colorado. Through it all, Peter stayed close, not as a pet, not even as a companion in the traditional sense, but as a mirror, a guide, a presence that gently reminded Jack what it meant to be fully here. One quiet evening on the Oregon coast, Jack parked the van along a cliff where the waves struck stone with slow, thoughtful rhythm. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the letter again, the one from Michael, the one that had changed everything. He read it out loud just once more. "Don't wait until it's too late to live fully. We think we have time until we don't." His voice caught on the last sentence. He folded the paper slowly, carefully, and tucked it into his journal, placing it back where it had always belonged. Then he turned to Peter, who sat just behind him, head tilted slightly, as if waiting. "I still don't know if you're carrying Michael's soul," Jack said quietly. "But I know this. You carried me out of the life I was drowning in. And that's enough for me." Peter rested his head gently against Jack's leg, pressing in the same way he had on the beach that first day, a gesture that needed no translation. The next morning, Jack stood before another crowd, this time in a small barn converted into a community center in Northern California. Rows of folding chairs, dozens of people, young and old, faces hopeful, faces broken, faces healing. He looked at them and said, "There was a time I measured life in calendar blocks and contracts, in progress reports and promotions, but none of that saved me. A dog did, a dog I didn't deserve. One who didn't bark much, but who somehow knew everything I never said." He paused, scanning the room. "I'm not sure if Peter carries someone else's spirit. Maybe he does. Maybe he's just himself. But what I do know, what I'm certain of, is this: he saved me. From a life that looked fine on paper, but felt like drowning. And in return, I've tried to become someone worth saving." Peter sat beside him, unmoving, watching. Later, as the sun began to dip beyond the tall pines outside, Jack walked alone with Peter to the van. He opened the back, letting the breeze roll through, and sat beside him in the open doorway. No one spoke. The air didn't ask them to. He thought about everything they'd lived since that island. He thought about the letter, the boy in the boat, the dream where the dog swam not toward him, but beyond him toward something unfinished. He didn't have all the answers. He wasn't sure he ever would. But what mattered now wasn't what had happened before. It was what they were doing with the second chance they'd been given. Peter stood, and looked down the path toward the beach. Without waiting, he trotted forward, then stopped, looking back at Jack, as if asking, "Are you coming?" Jack smiled. He got up and followed. They ran down the slope together, wind tugging at their clothes and fur, the smell of salt and pine in every breath. And in that moment, feet in the sand, the tide brushing in around them, Jack felt a clarity deeper than anything he'd known in his former life. This was what it meant to belong. To be found, to give yourself to something more than success. Peter didn't look back again. He didn't have to, because Jack wasn't behind him. He was right there, running alongside, both of them heading towards something they didn't need to define. And maybe that was the miracle. Not that Peter had come back from the brink, not that Jack had found redemption in a story that began with wreckage, but that somewhere along the way, a man and a dog, one lost, one running, had stopped keeping score, stopped asking who saved whom, and simply kept going, together. Because sometimes the most extraordinary stories don't end with an answer. They end with a beginning that never needed one. Some stories don't need closure, they just need to be carried forward one step, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. Jack never found out for certain whether Peter carried Michael's soul, but in truth, maybe that wasn't the point. What mattered was the life they built from the wreckage, the second chance they didn't plan for but embraced fully. So now we ask you, have you ever met an animal who changed the course of your life? Share your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it. And if this journey between a man and a dog moved you even a little, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us sometimes rescue is a two-way street.